Well, good afternoon. This subject, now it's interesting. I like to ask people first before I begin, how many people have heard of glyphosate or Roundup?
What is it?
Glyphosate?
Oh, yes.
Roundup.
Roundup?
It's the stuff in it.
It's the active ingredient in Roundup, yeah, and all the harm that it can cause. In genetically modified organism, GMOs, we've all heard of those things? Yeah, and how many have heard of excitotoxins? Okay. Typically, when you talk to people, they're quite familiar with glyphosate and the effects on the body and GMOs, but oftentimes they're not people who are too familiar with excitotoxins. And I think, in my opinion, because of my studies on them, I feel equally as hazardous to the body, if not more. But you know, the devil understands that in order to interfere the accomplishment of God's purpose in our lives, he's going to attack us at every possible way that he can, mentally, physically, or spiritually, because he knows that they're all intimately connected. And so I want to start out by reading a statement here. Now I'm going to be running two computers because I couldn't transfer my information to my wife's computer.
Turn that on.
I got it on, thank you. So this slide you won't see, but this slide is from Counsels for the Church, page 106. It says, as a people, we profess to be reformers. Now this is speaking of God's people, his Advent movement. He says, to be light bearers in the world, to be faithful sentinels for God, guarding every avenue whereby Satan could come in with his temptations to pervert the appetite. Our example and influence are what? Example and influence. What does that mean?
What we let people see in us,
Our life.
Our influence, the way our influence on other people.
That's right. So how we live. Our example. That's how we live by example. It's just not by our words, but it's we live to what we believe. So it's what we do then. Our example and our influence must be a power. We must abstain from any practice which will conscience or encourage temptation. We must open no door that will give Satan access to the mind of one human being formed in the image of God. And so we're to close every avenue that Satan cannot enter into the mind. Every avenue. Because the mind is the battleground of the great controversy. It's how Satan reaches men, and it's how God reaches men. And so the mind must be guarded by every avenue. Okay. Yeah. Okay, most of the information I'm going to be sharing with you today was taken from either the book, this is Dr. Russell Blaylock. He wrote a book, Excitotoxins, The Taste That Kills. I don't know if any of you are familiar with him or read any of his writings.
I've heard of
12
them.
years ago, yeah.
Okay. Anyway, he's the foremost, I guess, the person that people go to when they're looking for information on excitotoxins. So most of what I'm going to share from you probably is from this book or YouTube videos I've watched of him or articles that he's written. And some information I got from Dr. George Schwartz, he's another one, and Dr. John Olney. And so that's where most of my references are coming from, is from him. So what is an excitotoxin?
Something that excites the nervous system. I guess it's MSG, monosodium, glutamate, but it comes in different, they call it different forms and names, and different, you process it in different ways.
Very good. I have a definition here, and we'll just read that definition. It says, an excitotoxin is a substance which causes a pathological process by which brain cells are damaged and killed by excessive stimulation. So if I were to ask you to eat a substance or some food that contained this substance that would cause this reaction, would you do it?
A lot of us do it.
A lot of us do.
How do you know?
And yet we know that it will kill, damage, and kill the brain cells. Remember, we are to guard every avenue of the mind.
And I watched a video and it showed a woman went into a Chinese restaurant, came out, she was coming out, she fell down and had a seizure from the MSG and the food inside.
Now, if you read that book, he's got stories like that there. I can't share all of those things in just the 45, 50 minutes we're going to have here, but get that book. It's got stories and examples just of what you're saying. And so, knowing what this does to us, and knowing what the Word of God says, we had talked about this a little earlier. 1 Corinthians chapter 6 and chapter 3 both talk about it. It says, "What know ye not? That your body is the temple of God." And so it says that if we destroy this body, God will also destroy us. So we have a great responsibility to take care of this body. And so we are to be, by our example and influence. Okay, so we need to incorporate these things into our lives. So, where did excitotoxins come from? Japan. We got somebody who has done some studying. In 1908, there was a Japanese scientist, Ikeda. He wanted to know what the compound was in the seaweed that he would eat that made the foods taste so good. And so he started doing research, and what he found in this seaweed was MSG. He said this was the secret to the taste. Now we're going to take a look at more closely what is MSG. But he gave this taste a name, and he called it umami, which means tasty or delicious. And they actually added it to the other four tastes in the mouth that we have: sweet, sour, bitter, and salty. Now, how did this get to the United States of America then?
The soldier gets all of that.
That's right. In World War II, some American soldiers, they came upon some Japanese rations. And I don't know if it was because they didn't have any rations to eat, or they just thought, let's try their food, let's see what it tastes like. But they did. They ate the rations, and they thought, wow, this stuff tastes really good, far superior to what we're eating. Let's take a look at what's in here, which is natural, I'm sure. I've never eaten the rations they did in World War II, but anyway, so the Army, U.S. Army, they researched and found MSG was the ingredient responsible for the great taste. So, what is MSG?
Monosodium glutamate.
That's right. MSG is monosodium glutamate, just what it says. Mono meaning one, so there's one atom of sodium attached with glutamate. Now, glutamate is an amino acid. Now, amino acids, they're okay in our body. We want amino acids. They're the building blocks of proteins, so it's not a bad thing. And it says MSG has been added to many food and drink products since 1945 as a what? Taste enhancer. That was the only reason glutamate or MSG was added to the food. It serves no other purpose. It's not a preservative. It accomplishes nothing to the food other than enhance the taste of the food. So what is glutamate? We already looked at part of that. It is an amino acid. But glutamate is a neurotransmitter used in the central nervous system. In the central nervous system, it is made up of the brain and the spinal cord. Two pretty important things, very important. And so it is used in sending signals to other parts of the body from the brain to control homeostasis within the body. Does anybody know what homeostasis is?
It means the body's balanced, everything is working like it should.
That's right. The body is in balance, and that's what the body wants to do. God created it so we can bring it back into balance, because if it's out of balance, what happens? We're sick. We bring on disease. Dis means against, not good. Ease. We're not at ease. We're not comfortable. There's something wrong with the body, but it wants to maintain this homeostasis, okay? So, glutamate. It's found in very small quantities in the body. It is found naturally in some whole foods. And it is a non-essential amino acid. What does that mean, non-essential amino acid?
The body doesn't need it.
We don't need to take it into our body because our body synthesizes what we need of it. Because remember, it's in very small amounts. And it's found where?
Body.
In the brain and the spinal cord, in the central nervous system, okay? And very small amounts. Because this is the problem, I emphasize small amounts, this is the problem with the glutamate. It's the quantities that the body is taking in. They're massive quantities in the foods that causes this excitotoxin response. And we're going to look at that more closely. So in 1948, the U.S. Army invited the major food companies and introduced them to their discovery. Well, the food companies, they were very excited because, I don't know if any of you, but I remember even when I was younger, a lot of foods that came in cans tasted very tinny. Some of you probably remember that. And it had a distinct, you could taste it.
Peanut butter.
Peanut butter, okay. Yeah. So these food companies, they were excited about this because they thought it would take away that tinny flavor. People want to eat our food, more so than if it wasn't in there. And so they started adding to their foods. And there were no tests done because nobody thought MSG, what is that? It just enhances the flavor. And so they started adding to baby formulas too, baby food. And in 1957, there were two research scientists, Lucas and Newhouse. And they took this MSG just like research is done. You just take something, you're going to investigate it. I don't think they had any idea what MSG really was or what it would do, but they took it. They said, let's take this MSG and see what it can do. So they applied it to see if it could heal a diseased retina cells. Well, they found that it destroyed them. And not only destroyed them, it caused brain lesions on the mice being tested. And so they recorded their findings, but when they recorded it, it was in some journal. I don't know if they were not that well known, but it was recorded, and it was kind of lost and put aside. But in 1968, there was a neuropathologist, and a neuroscientist. They conducted their own studies on MSG. And they found indeed that it did destroy the retina cells, and it caused brain lesions that looked the same as those that were caused from strokes and Alzheimer's. And their findings were brought before the food industry. And when they brought it before the food industry, and I'll just tell you, and I think all of you do understand, and I say this kind of guardedly because I know there's good people everywhere, but just like anything, we know that money talks. And that's pretty evident today. We see that in our society today. But the food company, last time I checked, the gross national product, the dollars that were spent in the USA, 10% of them were in the food industry. A lot of money. And so when you go up against the food industry and there's something that's selling their product, they're going to fight back. And so they said, no, we don't care what your findings are. We're not going to change anything. Well, they took it to Congress and they showed them their findings. Well, Congress did do something, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. Well, actually, I'll just mention it now. What they chose to do, the FDA said, okay, because MSG is getting such a bad name, if you have MSG in your food product, you need to label it. Okay? And so what the food industry did, they were pretty clever. They decided, well, because MSG is such a bad name, now they don't have to label it MSG unless it's 99% pure MSG. So what they did is they put it in different names and make it lesser quantities so they could hide it under a whole bunch of names and still put it in their product. And we're going to look at those names that they hide it under. And so even though all of this was going on, the bad name, and this was all in the baby food, well, you can get a mother upset, boy, you mess with her baby. Well, the food industry said, we will take MSG out of the baby food. Well, it took them 10 years to do so, but they never did really take it out. All they did was put it in lower concentrations and change the names. It's a sad thing, but it's real. And Dr. Russell Blaylock, he was warned before he even started this project that you're going up against a giant to accomplish this. You know that. And he said, that's okay. It has to get out. People need to understand the damage that MSG can do to the brain. And we're going to see what those damages were. But this was part of the argument of the food company. They said that this MSG could not cross the blood-brain barrier. So these lesions that they were finding, they were saying that has nothing to do with the MSG. They said it can't cross the blood-brain barrier. And that was one of their arguments. They also said because glutamate was found naturally in the body, it isn't harmful. But studies were conclusive that indeed it could cross it if someone had stroke, head injury, seizures, MS, infections, brain surgery, certain drugs, heat stroke, irradiation, diabetes, high fever, hypertension, and the list goes on. Most people probably have had these things. So it certainly could cross your blood-brain barrier. They have proven it. There's many, I can't even remember how many studies there was, but there was thousands of studies on MSG done. And so they have concluded conclusively that indeed this MSG could indeed damage the brain. Now, there are some parts of the brain that are not protected by the blood-brain barrier. And some of those important ones are the hypothalamus, the pituitary gland, the pineal gland. These aren't even protected by the blood-brain barrier. So even if they could say, no, this couldn't pass it, well, what about these other glands? What about these other issues in the brain? But as I mentioned earlier, it was the concentration levels of the glutamate that was causing the excitatory process. And what it would do when you get an excess of glutamate, the neurons would start firing just rapidly and they couldn't shut off. And so the neurons would start dying. So brain cells are dying because of this MSG. And I want you to know that these brain cells do not recuperate. When they're gone, they're gone. So the damage that is done when they talk about the brain lesions, that's what happens with people who have strokes. That's why they have the inability to function normally, because they've had severe brain damage. So let's take a look at the hypothalamus. Now, when people look at issues that are, if somebody has an issue, health issue, I don't know, I guess I've never heard of anybody say, well, have you ever considered excitotoxins? I don't think many people consider excitotoxins as something that needs to be addressed, but I do believe it does. So when you look at the hypothalamus and all that it does, it controls and regulates the endocrine glands. Now the hypothalamus, it's kind of that connection between the brain and the endocrine glands. It gets the messages and it sends it out to these different glands. It says, this is what you need to do. So the hypothalamus is a very important element in the brain, very important. It controls all the endocrine glands. What are the endocrine glands? Well, we have the thyroid, which controls metabolism, the heart rate, our mood, the body temperature. The parathyroids regulates calcium and phosphorus. The adrenals regulate metabolism, immune system, blood pressure, stress. The testes and the ovaries, reproduction. The pancreas secretes insulin, glucagon, and it also aids with digestion. So MSG, if you have any of these issues, MSG could be a part of what is happening with the improper function of the endocrine system. So the hypothalamus, it controls the sleep and wake cycles. You know, so if people have issues with sleeping, could have something to do with MSG. And control of hunger and satiety, well, if you remember, and I remember this, Lay's potato chips, do you remember their slogan?
Can't eat
I bet you can't eat just one. And they were right. They knew you couldn't. So this has an effect upon your taste buds, which stimulates the brain to say, wow, I like that. Keep giving me that. I like it. And as it's doing it, it's stimulating the neurons, killing the brain cells one at a time. And people will think, well, I eat it and I don't really notice it. But you know, people who'd smoked for years, they didn't get cancer till maybe 20, 30, 40 years later, but it was doing its damage. Same as MSG. It is killing brain cells. You may see it slowly or may not see it for a time, but it's happening. It's happening. It's also involved with the autonomic nervous system, the heart rate, the peristalsis, the limbic system with the emotions, love, fear, anger, compassion, and empathy. And with the things going on today, who needs an excess of those emotions that are stimulated by MSG? But here's a big one. It's a regulation of the immunity. MSG suppresses the immune system. That's interesting. Especially now with all of the diseases going on today, we don't need our immune system suppressed. The pituitary and pineal gland. The pituitary regulates metabolism, growth, blood pressure, reproduction. And the pineal releases melatonin. That's where the sleep cycle, where that's affected. So let's look beyond the blood-brain barrier. Let's look at the placental blood barrier. Now, pregnant mice were fed MSG, and their offspring were compared with the offspring of mice not fed MSG. They were found intellectually impaired, having severe reductions of norepinephrine, which helps the brain to focus and concentrate, to pay attention. Do we have any of those issues today? Overloaded with those issues today, with everything going on. But it says it was also found that there was an 80% reduction in the frontal lobe of acetylcholine. Does anybody know what acetylcholine is?
It's good for your memory. It's in a lot of, that's not good for your memory.
It is good for your memory. It is. Acetylcholine is another neurotransmitter. So, and it's in the frontal lobe. So if you want action to take place in the frontal lobe, you need acetylcholine. And it says it has reduced it by 80%. Look at the bottom of that. Oh, I don't have it on there. This is the old ones. That's why I couldn't update it. That's why I'm using my computer. But it's in all of these processes. But it's also where we do what? Our moral decision making. If we have an 80% decrease in that ability, it's tough enough. Satan knows. He knows that the battleground is the mind. And he's doing everything he can to make that moral decision making difficult. And so we're to guard what? Every avenue. Every avenue. Whoops.
Reading, but I mean, the people around us that are going to eat it anyway.
Well, that's why we're to educate. I mean, because they have to make moral decisions too. And that's why I'm thankful that we have all these trials going on. Because if everything was status quo and going on as normal, everybody would be acting the way they used to. Complacent, not concerned about what's going on in the world. But all the things that are going on, in God's mercy, it's to get our attention. Something's going to happen. You need to be ready. What is it? People are asking questions. Do you know what's going on here? Well, I have some thoughts. It's given us opportunity to share. You know, and I'll share that tomorrow. But there is hope, sister. You said it looks impossible, but you know, it's just like faith. How can I make it from day to day? If I believe my character is to be like Christ, how can I make it from day to day? And rightly represent Him.
You have to stay connected.
You have to stay connected. But God has always given us a way out of every temptation. That's what His Word says. For every temptation, He has made a way for us to escape. Every one. So there is no reason for us to say, well, I can't make it. I can't do this.
Well, it wasn't me so much as like I said, the people around us. I mean, because a lot of them, they don't care. They'll just keep on eating them. But if it affects them like that, then that's what's going to come on us and affect us.
That's right.
Because if they don't have any moral thought about doing things, which you can see that right now, that there's not.
And so think of what this diet is doing to them. It's getting worse and worse. And the reason why I said that, because I was leading up to there's something we can do. And so we can share with them too, if they care. You're right. It's up to them though. But we can eat foods. Now I don't have the slide. I didn't get to update it onto my wife's computer. But there are foods that contain choline. And what our body does is it converts it into acetylcholine. So if we have been guilty of eating MSG and those different things, God forgives us. And so we can just incorporate the things that He has given us to help restore the things that we lack. Now, the things that are high in choline, there's soybeans, kidney beans, and pardon?
Soy lecithin, sunflower seed lecithin.
And I'll just say, just beans. Beans. Eat beans. Beans are good. But shiitake mushrooms are high in choline. Broccoli, Brussels sprouts. And herbs. When I look at herbs, it's amazing how people always mention the same herbs over and over again for different things, anti-inflammatory, antibacterial. But there are certain herbs that contain high amounts of choline. Paprika, garlic, turmeric, thyme, onion, cayenne, ginger, parsley, basil, and oregano. You see those herbs a lot for a lot of different things. So the herbs are excellent sources for a lot of different things. So get your herbs. So, okay, I'll make sure I match. Intrauterine. It says the sensitivity intrauterine up to the age of 4 to excitotoxins is 4 times greater than in an adult. So think of the youth. 4 times, so whatever it's going to harm us because they're at a very sensitive age. And so 4 times the effect upon them. It says the damage caused at those ages is what? Permanent. So can you see why there was such a press by these people who've done research to get it out of the baby foods, to get it out of the baby formulas? And yet it's still there. Why? Why is it in our food even for adults? If there's no benefit for it, it's not anything truly but to make the product taste better, to get you to eat their product and to eat more of it. It serves no other purpose. But brain disorders have skyrocketed in the last 30 to 40 years. ADD, ADHD, autism, Asperger's, the list goes on. Simply because MSG, not just because of MSG, but it plays a strong influence. And they believe that it plays a greater influence than they used to once believe. Because the rise is so high in these mental issues. And so what else? It goes on. In the excitatory destruction process, the cell, there are high levels of free radicals released. Do we understand what free radicals are? So when you have this cell damage because of these neurons are firing and they're dying, when these cells die, they're releasing these free radicals. They're unbalanced because the cells are damaged. And so because these cells are damaged, these free radicals are going around and they want to be balanced. They're out of balance. And so they go to different cells and they grab electrons. I need this to bring me into balance. So they're taking it from a healthy cell, damaging that cell. And so that's why this MSG is doubly wicked, if you will. Because it's causing damage in other cells and it's causing so much to the point that they're seeing it linked to cancer. And not just cancer, but other diseases. So, is it safe if the package says no MSG? You would think so, wouldn't you? But because MSG, as I mentioned earlier, was receiving such bad press that the food companies had to do something. So the FDA told them that they did not have to label MSG if it was not 99% pure. So the food companies labeled it under other names with lower concentration levels so they could hide the MSG. So what if it says no added MSG? Is that safe? Well, that's deceptive as well because it simply is added under a disguised name. And most foods contain it anyway, so you don't need to add it. Okay? And one other thing about excitotoxins, they work synergistically. Do you understand what synergistically means? It means, let's say you have something that's listed at 50%, because most foods don't contain just one excitotoxin. They contain multiple. And so they're added together. The strength is added up. It gets more and more toxic. The higher concentration you have, they add together to increase that concentration level. So, what if the label says sugar-free? Is that safe? How many have heard of aspartame? Yeah. Bad, bad, bad. And you're going to see just how bad, bad, bad it really is. And people are putting this into their bodies not even knowing. Not even knowing. Many of them don't know. This is not something they advertise. But it says anything labeled sugar-free, diet, low-fat, low-sugar will contain MSG. It might contain?
It will.
No, it will contain MSG. In 1981, this was back many years ago already, almost 40 years ago. Or actually, yeah, 40 years ago. Former FDA toxicologist Dr. Adrian Gross, he said that it is clear beyond any shadow of a doubt that aspartame caused cancer in laboratory animals. He said beyond any shadow of a doubt, it does. It's linked not again just to the damage of the neurons, but cancer causing as well because of the free radical damage. And so who do you think owns a patent for aspartame? Monsanto. Whoops. Oh, I don't know, ended up with a blank screen. Monsanto. And so I have a statement, again, I couldn't update, so I'm just going to read this statement I found online. It says, this is speaking of aspartame, once inside the body, aspartame changes chemically into formaldehyde. This is a substance that is grouped in the same class of poisons as cyanide and arsenic. And when a product containing aspartame is heated to more than 86 degrees, and they give an example for it, like artificially sweetened hot cocoa, a brain cancer-causing byproduct called, now this is a long word, diketopiperazine is formed. Hard word. But anyway, it forms a cancer-causing product in the brain. So to me, why is this product allowed to be the things that are sold? Well, again, aspartame is getting a very bad name as well. It's getting out there. So now they're creating neotame, and there's other different no sugar or non-sugar additives that are same responses as aspartame, but they're changing the name again just to conceal really the facts of what's going on. So let's take a look at some of the, this here is not updated. Okay. This is just another little comment I found dealing with aspartame. It says, artificially sweetened beverages can triple your risk of stroke and dementia or Alzheimer's. Aspartame is the #1 consumed artificial sweetener in America, causing anything from depression to weight gain, and has been linked to brain tumors. In 1985, Monsanto bought the company, credited with aspartame's invention, and since then, over 900 published studies have come out revealing the detrimental effects of aspartame. And it just seems strange to me, and yet it's just allowed to be continued to used in all of our foods. All of our foods. And I want to go through a list here of some of the names. This is not all, but this is some of the names that, I don't know if you can read that on here. So this is some of the names of things that always contain MFG. Now MFG is different than MSG. MFG, does anybody know what MFG stands for? Manufactured free glutamate. In other words, it's still MSG, but a different name, because there are foods that contain glutamate, like tomatoes, but God packaged them in such a way that our body can deal with them It can digest them, but when they're free, when they're extracted and put in concentrated forms, our body can't deal with the levels of glutamate. But I want you to look at some of these. Do you see nutritional yeast flakes? That's a big one that many of us use. Yeah, that is a strong, always contains MFG. And that's why I brought up, we are to guard every avenue. And so some of this may be new to you, but we share these things not to condemn anybody, but we want you to be ready. If these things are harmful for you and they're going to reduce by 80% the function of your moral decision making, we want to be ready. Satan knows that these things will do that. But we can go through TVP. Many people use TVP. Soy protein. A lot of these names you look at and you think, well, they don't really sound like they're bad. Well, they don't want them to sound bad. But you can see soy sauce. Anything enzyme modified, anything containing enzymes. Enzymes sound like a good thing. Anything fermented. So these things all sound good, and yet they always contain MFG. So we need to be label readers. Label readers. We want our minds sound and fit, because what's ahead, this is pretty easy right now. But you think about when this whatever you call it, pandemic came in. I don't know how many people saw that coming. And there's still a debate between people, and to each their own, but should I wear the mask? Shouldn't I? Should I get the injection? Shouldn't I? These are all decisions we're going to have to make. And if we don't have that capacity to understand what God's Word says and how it relates to my decisions with those things, we will be deceived.
So if all this yeast has it in there, so we're not even used to use yeast then, huh?
Now, the regular yeast that you use for raising bread, I'm not sure if that is part of it. I know it's yeast foods, and I'm not sure. I tried researching a lot of these. I mean, I've looked up these. What is caseinate? What really are these things? Because I wanted to know. So yeast food, what does that exactly mean? I'm not sure.
Yeast that's used for raising bread is also in question. I've actually stopped using it because it is fermented, and you never know where it's come from. It may be grown on GMO products.
And so to me, I guess anything fermented, we know what happens with anything that starts fermenting. That's how they make alcohol.
That's a natural process, though.
Yes, and we're to eat our foods fresh, So, I mean, things die because of sin. Fermenting is a process of death. Yeah. So that's just the result of sin. So now we're going to look at another list. I got to make sure now this list here, it says names of ingredients that often contain MFG. Carrageenan. Now there's many milks that the soy milks and different things that a lot of them have carrageenan in them. So we can look at the names there. Natural flavor. Many people, when you see natural flavor, well, that's natural. That's good. No. Citric acid, well, that comes from an orange or a lemon or something. You would think, well, that's got to be good. But many of these things, like I said, the devil likes to work with deception. He likes to hide his purposes behind the scenes. And all of these things are part of MSG. We just looked at the damages that can do. Here's another list. Now these are suspected ingredients. Cornstarch, corn syrup, modified food starch. A lot of these things certainly look innocent enough, but yet they do research, they find that they do contain some. So where can MSG be found? Well, it's in almost all processed foods because we looked at what the food industry, they said, man, this makes our food taste pretty good. I want them eating my food. Yes?
Because they can take paper and make it taste good, cardboard.
They sure can.
And so you will like it because it tastes good.
They sure can. There's no question about it. And it's not just to taste good, again, like I said previously, but they want you to eat more because you can't stop at just one.
Yeah.
That's right. So, and this one surprised me too. Several of these did. But you know how the fruit in the stores looks so shiny and good? Well, not many people eat fruit, but even the food industry wants you eating their food. And so they're putting MSG on the coatings of these fruits, not just to look good, because they want that flavor enhancer in your mouth. I think I'll eat another apple. On fruit, on the wax, it just seems so strange. Where will they stop? But even to get children to take medications, they put it in there. So children will take their medications. Vaccines, this one really surprised me. Though this one I found the article was May 21st of this year. There was over 35 different vaccines that contained MSG. Why would you have MSG in a vaccine? Because they know the damage it will cause. Now, that's a pretty strong statement for me to say that, but why else would it be in there? Why? Why is it even in our foods? Why is it especially in baby foods, baby formulas, when the effects on them, they don't even have a developed immune system. We see that it depressed the immune system, but they can't even fight it. It's 4 times the effect upon the babies as adults. We find it in soaps, cosmetics, shampoos, sunscreen, creams, insect repellents. Why would it be on those things? Why would MSG be in those things? Dog food, cat food, because they want your dogs and cats eating more of their product too. We're seeing more and more that these cats and dogs are getting tumors and cancers. They're getting sicker and sicker because simply of eating all this processed food. So I want to ask you a question. We're going to look at an ingredient label here. Now, all of the ingredients that I have highlighted and underlined, this is one product. This is one food. It has 21 known or suspected excitotoxins in it. One package. I want to ask you, would you eat that? Knowing what you know now, would you eat that? You may have, but some of these things you look at, they look so innocent. Where was the one? Caramel coloring. Yeah. Caramel coloring, that doesn't sound... Yeah, it all sounds good. But these are known or highly suspected to contain MSG. So, I don't have... I'm so sorry, folks. I didn't get my update. That's why I'm using 2 computers here. And so I don't have the picture on there. But you know what that product is? Veggie Links.
Veggie links.
Veggie Links. Now,
What product?
what do you mean?
That's a list on the veggie?
This is a label. I copied this off of the can of Veggie Links.
Oh, okay.
That's what it contains. 21. And some of these I researched. Some of them, some articles I read said, yeah, some of these other ingredients were excitotoxins, but I found other articles that said they weren't. So I didn't even include them. There could be even more. These are the ones that I confirmed were known MSG, contained MSG. So my point is this: Satan knows that we need to guard every avenue, and that's especially the mind. And so we think that, well, not we, but many think that they're doing good by not eating meat, by eating these processed foods. And it may be better. I said that once, and some man looked at me and said, how can you say that when you just told me everything it does? He said, meat eating is better than that. And I may have to agree with him now. But this isn't just Veggie Links. You can't take soybean and make it taste the way it tastes without... I've looked at numerous, whether it's Loma Linda or Worthington canned products, and they all contain multiple, double-digit ingredients containing this. And not only is that bad, but soybean, it's the number one sprayed crop of glyphosate. The last time I saw, 96% of the soybeans are GMO.
98.
Or 98% now. So you're getting a triple whammy. You're getting glyphosate, genetically modified, and you're getting excitotoxins. Devil knew what he was doing. Many Seventh-day Adventists eat this food. Many of them are unaware of it. But that's why we need to educate one another, because their minds are being affected and their health. So, MSG, these are known to cause or be closely related to migraines, seizures, blurred visions, increased appetite, overeating, infertility, reproductive disorders, impaired brain function, cardiovascular damage, ADD, ADHD, heart palpitations, tremors, headaches, violence. It is also known to increase the susceptibility enhancement of ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and Huntington's diseases, because a lot of these diseases deal with motor function. Remember, this caused neuron damage, and they're finding these things, the same brain lesions that they're finding in the mice that they're testing with the MSGs, the same things that they're seeing in Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and stroke victims. So we don't just leave you there, but what are some of the things that we can do to help combat MSG? Well, remember, we saw that when this damage was going on from the excitatory action, it was killing brain cells and it was causing oxidative stress. And oxidative stress is the release of free radicals. So if it's oxidative stress, then we want what? Antioxidants. These are some of the things that are very high in antioxidants. Vitamin C, vitamin E, magnesium. And these are some of the foods. Again, we see the herbs again, don't we? Garlic, ginger, turmeric, blueberries, strawberries, kale, artichoke, raspberries. These are just a few. So we got to take in a diet high of antioxidants. So what else can we do besides taking in these antioxidants? Didn't move, did it? Okay. Last day events, page 99. It says again in, pardon?
Would you mind going back to the other screens? I can't.
Oh, sure. Yep.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And you can do your own research too. Antioxidants, I just put a few things that I found in, some of the more common. What else can we do? Again and again, the Lord has instructed that our people are to take their families away from the cities into the country where they can raise their own provisions. For in the future, the problem of buying and selling will be a very serious one. I think that's good advice. Pardon?
It seems like the problem of buying is a very serious one. If you're buying the garbage.
And that's a good point. I wanted to bring that up because we often think that this problem of buying and selling is going to come in the time of trouble when the Sunday law is passed, but that problem is now. It was years ago. It's hard to find food that doesn't contain all of these ingredients that we talked about. And not only that, even if you go to the grocery store and buy something that's non-GMO and it's organic, many of it, the soil that is produced on, it is so mineral deficient that you still are not getting the minerals that you need or that the body needs. That's why things are so flavorless. They taste kind of blah. You know, but just this fall when I went back home to North Dakota, my mom, she dug me up some potatoes and some beets and some carrots, and when we were eating them, it was like, wow, why does this taste so much better? Because of the minerals that are in it. And so we want to raise our own provisions. So what else can we do? And I was reading some of these statements, and I don't know if it was correlated to my study here, but I was noticing something over and over again, and I was like, you know what? I think Sister White knew this problem was going to be. She knew this problem of excitatory business in our foods was going to happen, and so I was finding some statements I want to share with you that I found interesting, that I think are correlated to this excitotoxin process. She says grain, fruits, nuts, vegetables constitute the diet chosen for us by our Creator. These foods prepared in as simple and natural a manner as possible are the most healthful and nourishing. They impart a strength, a power of endurance, and a vigor of intellect. Interesting. That are not complex and stimulating diet. I think she was onto something. She was way ahead of her time. This was taken in a health report, Temperate in All Things. It says, intemperance commences at the table in the use of unhealthful food. After a time, as the digestive organs become weakened, the food does not satisfy the appetite, and there is a craving. So we even have cravings for these things. For more stimulating foods and drinks. So the devil give them to him. You want them? I'm going to make it easy for you. Here they are. These produce an immediate effect and are freely indulged in. Under their influence, the nervous system is what? Excited. Didn't we read that with the MSG? Very same thing. The statement goes on, in some cases, for the time being, the intellect seems to be invigorated and the imagination to be more vivid, but there is always a reaction. The nervous system, having been unduly excited, borrows power for the present use from its future resources. And that's kind of what I see is what happened when these free radicals were formed because of the excitatory process of the killing of the neurons. They went out and borrowed, didn't they, from the other cells. They were grabbing electrons. They needed them. And so this present future resources and all this temporary invigoration of the system is followed by depression. I got one more statement I want to share with you in regards to that. Or maybe two more. Gross and stimulating food fevers the blood, excites the nervous system, and too often dulls the what? Didn't we talk about that? Didn't we say an 80% reduction in acetylcholine in the frontal lobe because of these excitotoxins? That's where we make our moral decisions. That's why it dulls the moral perceptions. I believe she understood this. God gave her this message many years ago. We just didn't know. We didn't know. So that reason and conscience are overborne by the sensual impulses. Counsels to the Church, page 227. She says, every true Christian will have control of his appetite and passions. Unless he is free from the bondage and slavery of appetite, he cannot be a true, obedient servant of Christ. It is the indulgence of appetite and passion which makes the truth of none effect upon the heart. It is impossible for the spirit and power of the truth to sanctify a man, soul, body, and spirit when he is controlled by appetite and passion. Very strong statement. And Satan makes these things difficult to quit. That's why when you put them in your tongue, it just stimulates. Your brain says, I want more. And so it's a difficult thing, but we can overcome it again. And for me, when I'm in question or in doubt of certain things, my mind, for me personally, always takes me to this verse. Mark chapter 15 and verse 23. Oops, didn't advance. Oh, it's not on this one. Okay. I'm sorry, but I'll read it to you. Mark chapter 15, verse 23. It says, and they gave him to drink wine mingled with myrrh, but he received it. Christ was upon the cross, and he was suffering excruciating pain. This could have reduced his pain, but he spat it out. Do you know why? Because he knew it would affect his mind. He was guarding every avenue that Satan could not gain entrance to the mind. And that's what we need to be. This is serious because Christ is coming soon. And we can say, well, maybe a little this. God isn't that particular. Well, I think many of us probably will be quite surprised and probably would say to ourselves, I wished I would have not done that. And so we share these things to encourage you to think about the future from cause to effect. You know, that we're very careful because now we know that deception of all kinds are coming upon the earth. And we're going to need every brain cell. And now, I don't want to take away the factor of faith. Because that has to be our ultimate salvation, is faith. But when the brain is being destroyed by these foods, it's hard to make proper decisions. You know, our learning, our thinking, our brains are not clear. And so we want to rightly represent Christ. We can't really do that if we're under the influence of our appetite and our passions.